In this video, I'll show a demonstration of the Heathkit AR-3 Communications Receiver. The AR-3 was a tube-type communications or general coverage shortwave receiver made by the Heathkit company from 1956 to 1961. It was offered as a kit and sold for $27.95 less cabinet. Notable features of the radio include a 5-tube AC-powered design, frequency coverage as follows: Band A, the 550 to 1600 kHz AM broadcast band; Band B, 1.5 to 4 MHz shortwave, which includes the 160 and 80 meter ham bands; Band C, 4 to 11 MHz shortwave, including the 40 meter ham band; and Band D, 10 to 30 MHz shortwave, marked with the 20, 15, 11, and 10 meter ham bands. It has a band spread control, a transformer power supply, AM or CW single sideband reception with BFO, which was not adjustable, a noise limiter, antenna trimmer control, RF and audio gain control, and switchable automatic volume control, and a headphone jack. The shipping weight is listed as 12 pounds less case. This radio was the successor to the AR-2 model. As compared to the AR-2, it's similar in appearance but with a few changes. The tube count was reduced by 1, an antenna trimmer control was added, it offered 4 rather than 3 bands, it makes use of more modern IF transformers and coils, and it has a lighted dial. There wasn't one clear successor to replace the AR-3. If I had to choose one, I would probably pick the GC1A Mohican. I also have a video of that receiver that you can check out. Let's take a look at the front panel. Left of the tuning dial, we have AC power and volume or AF gain. To the right of the tuning dial is tuning. Neither of these knobs are labeled, although all the other controls are. The tuning dial is of the slide rule type, showing the 4 available bands. There are dial lights on either side of the dial. At the bottom from left to right, we have the RF gain control. At the fully clockwise position, a switch turns on AVC or automatic volume control. A switch on the RF gain is an unusual way to control AVC, but avoided the need for an extra switch. Next is the mode selector for phone, standby, or CW. CW is for Morse code and could also be used for single sideband voice signals. Standby turns off high voltage but keeps the tubes warmed up. Typically, if you were using it with a transmitter, you would switch the receiver to standby mode during transmitting. Next is the band switch, selecting one of 4 bands. To the right is antenna trim, and at the far right is the band spread tuning, which offers 4 turns and a dial which indicates from 0 to 100. This was used as a more accurate fine tuning control to supplement the main tuning. There's a grill on the left side with an internal speaker. On the back panel, the connectors are for ground and antenna, the AC line cord, IF input for the optional Cue Multiplier discussed later, then an octal accessory socket, which was also for the Cue Multiplier or other accessories that might want to be powered by the receiver, A&L or automatic noise limiter on-off control, and headphone jack. Note that the back is open, not particularly safe by today's standards, but probably necessary for ventilation in the solid wooden case. Let's take a look inside the chassis out of the case. You can see the copper-plated chassis, 5 tubes, and large power transformer. This is the speaker, and here are the coils and caps that are adjusted for alignment. Underneath the chassis are most of the discrete components and point-to-point wiring. The receiver is quite easy to work on as there's not a lot of wiring underneath. Believe it or not, the cabinet was optional and cost $4.50. It's made of pyroxylin impregnated fabric, which is much like paper, over plywood. The original purchaser of this radio obviously sprang for the extra $4.50 to get the cabinet. The noise limiter switch on the back is not very convenient, but most users probably left it on or off all the time. The The civil defense frequencies are marked on the dial as was standard during the early days of the Cold War. These frequencies at 640 and 1240 kHz were used to notify the public in the event of enemy attack. The dial also lists the HF ham bands and 7 WWV frequencies. The 11-meter ham band is no longer a ham band but was at the time. The WWV time standard frequencies are still accurate. What were they thinking when they selected the tiny tuning knob? You only get half a turn in total. A much bigger knob would have made tuning easier. At least it has a band spread tuning control, which has a vernier, although it isn't calibrated. To reduce the tube count over the AR-2, they did some tricks to use one tube for detector, AVC, audio amp, BFO, and noise limiter. I mentioned the connectors on the back for the optional QF1 Cue Multiplier. This was an external box that would improve selectivity. It sold for $9.95. There's a big warning in the manual that the phono jack on the back of the radio is not for connecting a phonograph. On the AR and AR-2 it was. The jack has over 200 volts DC on it and would zap you and or your phonograph if you tried this. The marketing material for the AR-3 says it is a fine receiver for a beginning amateur. That's doubtful. Maybe for receiving, but try tuning the 40-meter band and know what frequency you're on. On the higher bands it would be even worse. Nevertheless, some hams did use this as their first receiver along with a transmitter of the same vintage like the AT1. I recently bought this particular unit from its original owner who built it around 1959. He would have been in his teens, I estimate. It was a little worse for wear but still functional after over 40 years. Some modifications have been made. The function switch has been bypassed to always be in phone mode, with the end of the shaft cut off and no knob. I think he only uses for shortwave broadcast listening and not ham radio use. Some circuit changes appear to have been made, but I haven't studied them all yet. Two knobs were missing. The band switch knob here is not original. It's just one that I had around. The restoration I did was mostly cleaning and alignment. I put on a new line cord. Note that this radio has none of the paper type capacitors which are notorious for failure over time. In summary, the AR-3 was a low-cost general coverage shortwave receiver that at the time was a good value for the price. It was a kit that was simple enough that a teenager could assemble it and would have made a good first receiver for a budding ham radio operator on a budget. Made for a period of about 6 years, not a lot of units of this model still survive and are in working order.